My name is Mazen Nassar. I have been in the industry since the 1980s, and I have a company right now in Jebel Ali, and I have a lot of colleagues in the industry, one of which is Virgil, and he'll be doing the next presentation. Virgil is one of the very few people who's a journalist right now, but he's one of the very few that worked actually in the industry. Then he became a journalist, which is something unique in the industry. And he will be doing the next presentation. And let me just introduce a bit about him. He's the former senior executive for Asia Sat Center, and he wrote 2 books on mass communications. He wrote articles in numerous trade and academic publications, including the Encyclopedia Britannica. He will be doing his first presentation on the business outlook. Virgil.
Well, thank you very much, Mazen, and thank you for all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to see my home in Los Angeles, which I've been cooped up in the last year and a half, and I'm sure most of you are. I'm really so glad. This is my first overseas conference and exhibition that I've attended, overseas outside of the U.S. I've attended 3 others in the U.S., but this is the first one, and from the looks of it, it really looks very good. And we're going to be discussing today, as Mazen said, the key trends in the satellite industry. Now, as he said, I'm a journalist. I'm the editor of Satellite Markets and Research. And just for those of you who are familiar with the satellite markets and research, we've got a booth here too at the exhibition. It's right there, actually, 214. So we have there's some copies of the magazine around there. So I won't go into much into this, but we have a website which covers the global satellite industry, and we also do market briefs, market reports or technical reports, and I also actually do some of these trainings. So normally these briefings that I do, some can last just 1 or 2 sessions, or the longest one is 2 days, you know, and I've done it in several parts of the world. I've been invited to speak at that. So I'm going to try and compress in about 20 minutes, or 15, you know, so to give time for some questions. Quickly run through what I see as the key trends in the industry. But first, a little background, just so we're all on the same page. This is from as Mazen said, I wrote 2 books. So one of them is on the satellite technology guide for the 21st century. So there are basically 4 different segments of the satellite industry. There's satellite manufacturing, ground equipment, services, and the launch industry. So we're going to be discussing that. You know, like I said, this is usually a very long briefing, but I'm going to try and run through it very quickly. Now, every year, the Satellite Industry Association, based in Washington, D.C., publishes the state-of-the-art of the industry. So the last one they did was in June for 2020. And in 2020, the satellite industry, as you can see here, was valued at $271 billion. Now, when I started satellite market and research, you know, I wrote a book, The Satellite Technology Guide. It's in the cover, actually. It says $100 billion industry. I started it in 2008. So in 13 years, it almost tripled in value. Another very important thing to note here is the SIA, the Satellite Industry Association, has been doing this report since 1999, so over 20 years. Every year, including the recession, the dot-com bust, the industry has been growing. And the pandemic, the global pandemic is no exception. It also grew during the pandemic. So, here are the highlights of that report. the global space economy grew only 1.4% to US 371 billion. But the satellite industry is 70% of the space economy. So that really shows how important the satellite industry is to the whole space economy. The ground equipment segment grew to 135.3 billion in total revenue for the year, reflecting the rise of consumer broadband, on-the-move connectivity, and satellite-enabled smartphones and everything. And a lot of this has been due to the pandemic as well, when people need to be connected, people stay at home, etc. And corollary to that, satellite broadband revenue grew by 10%. This is during the 2020. Can you imagine? During the height of the pandemic. The Satellite Executive Briefing, the magazine that we publish, we do an index, which is like a guide. It's not an index fund. It's just a guide on how the industry is growing. So very quickly here, we have a basket of 20 companies in the 4 different segments that I just showed you, which include satellite operators, manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, and service providers. Very, very quickly, the value of the index, this started in, I started this business in 2008. So in January 2008, the index was 1,000. Now it's 2,999. You see their index value, September 6th. That's the last time we calculated it. So like I said, it tripled in just 13 years. This is when I started this business. It's keeping up with it's keeping up with the S&P 500. See, the S&P quadrupled during that time, actually, 4,300. 4,000%, starting at 1,000, so 4 times growth. Now you see percentage change since January 2015. Just since the beginning of the year, the satellite index has grown by 21%. And the S&P grew by 15%. So the satellite industry is growing at a faster pace than the S&P, which is a basket of 500 different multinational companies. Okay. Last year, I spoke in one of the SSPI's Zoom webinars, and they asked me, what's the biggest story? And I said, of course, there's no doubt about it. The global pandemic is the biggest story of the year. It affected all our lives. It affected everything that, how we deal with business, how we relate with each other, etc. And I wrote an article in the Satellite Executive Briefing, the satellite industry in the time of COVID. And this was in April. So it was declared a pandemic in March. And at that time, I already said that, that the satellite industry should be able to weather the pandemic better than most industries. First, it was considered an essential industry. So it didn't have a lot of the restrictions that the other industries have. And now, as we are approaching more in the post-pandemic stage, 7 of the 10 top technology trends by the World Economic Forum. So they all, every year, the World Economic Forum lists down what are the key technology trends where the trends are going. And 7 out of those 10 trends are opportunities for the satellite industry. They are potential areas where satellite industry can get into and provide services and expand their businesses. And those 7 out of the 10 is online shopping, digital contact payments, remote work. Now that's very important. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about that. Most of you work from home at least part of the pandemic, and people are getting used to it. They're liking it, So it's very hard to get people back, So you have to kind of maybe make an arrangement where, they spend some time at home and spend some time in the office. So all of that would require bandwidth, And bandwidth is the currency of the satellite industry. That's what we live for, bandwidth. Here are the key trends that I see. Let me just pull out something here very quickly about the amount. See, that in the 3rd quarter alone of 2021, so that's June to September, 3rd quarter, $9.8 billion in investment, just 1 quarter, and that's while we're still in a pandemic. A lot of this is from SPACs. SPACs are special purpose acquisition companies. And it's kind of complicated, so I'll explain it very quickly. A SPAC is like a specially created company wherein there's a larger company behind it. So a smaller company or a startup doesn't have to have all the the financials, for 2 years. They don't need to have all the records. They can piggy bank with a bigger company, but they created a special entity for that where they can raise money. And to be honest, that's really it's quite easy to get right now. And I've been, like Masin said, I've been covering the industry for 20 years now. It feels like, before the dot-com boom, and then the busted, where everybody has a business plan, or trying to sell something, or trying to start something. That's how it feels right now. Because I always get people, calling me or emailing me, to help them out, help out besides their company, help get to investors, get to all that. So that's the mood right now. When there's a lot of investment and interest in the satellite and the space industry. Now, restructuring. Obviously, the satellite industry is changing. And just to give you some barometer, last week, what I think the most important news last week in the satellite industry is that some of the top satellite companies, announced that their CEOs are retiring. And at the same time, actually, within a few hours, Intelsat and Eutelsat CEOs announced that they're retiring from the business. These are people who've been in the business a long time. Before that, ArabSat's CEO. Now, that could be just coincidence, right? But I think, and it's not just me, there's other analysts who've written about this already, that these are indicators that this industry is changing. There's a changing of the guard, because the industry is in an inflection point. Another key trend to watch is that there are certain key verticals that the satellite industry is focusing on. Okay, and not in order of importance here, but the key vertical markets for the satellite industry in the years to come are maritime, oil and gas, aeronautical, IoT, and 5G. Okay. So, for instance, let's just talk about them a little bit one by one. The maritime field, the maritime field is the only area where satellite is a monopoly. Because other than, within a few miles from shore, the only way to reach ships really is by a satellite, Now, there's a lot of talk about the maritime industry taking a very big hit during the pandemic, but actually it's only a small part of the maritime industry. It was the cruise ship industry. And that's starting to come back now. So, the projections are that the maritime industry will start to recover by next year to the same level as 2019, before the pandemic. And then it will continue to grow after that. Okay. Aeronautical is the same. Around the same time frame, much more or less. It's going to recover next year, and then will grow exponentially after that. IoT. IoT is a very big business. And then, depending on what research you're looking at, the opportunity for IoT is Internet of Things, by the way, which is monitoring equipment and control, SCADA applications, etc. Billions of devices or units that have to be controlled. They control temperature, etc., and all that. Even if the satellite industry, see, there's some projections. The research is very diverse on this. Some can say that the satellite might get 1.5% of that. So 1.5% of 50 billion or 60 billion devices is a lot. Not very good at math, but that's a lot. It could even be as high as 10 to 15%. So I don't want to get into the details about that, but suffice to say that this is one area of that the satellite industry is focusing on. Oil and gas is coming back. I'm sure I don't need to talk to you about that if you're working here in the Middle East. And not just oil and gas, actually, mining, all remote operations require satellites. 5G, there's also an opportunity for satellites. And of course, the biggest trend that we see right now are generally they're called technically non-geostationary satellites, NGSO. So not just LEOs, low orbit, that includes also MEOs, and now there's even talk of very low Earth orbits. So, as I said, the billionaires are here, and the two richest men in the world, are backing up I think the front runner, well, this is kind of debatable, but the key players here, are SpaceX, Elon Musk's Starlink, and he goes back and forth with Jeff Bezos being the richest man in the world, not just now, but in history. Fortune just said that, that nobody has ever had so much money in the entire history of the world, according to Fortune magazine. Jeff Bezos, Amazon has the Project Kuiper, and then OneWeb, which actually went into bankruptcy, has now been given a new lease on life with a new influx of investments from the UK government, from Bharti, the Indian conglomerate, and Eutelsat actually invested a lot in OneWeb. Telesat is really into it, and Inmarsat had just announced also their own system that they're coming up called Orchestra. Now, I think this really will dominate the news for the next decade or so. LEOs are really the thing right now. We go back in history, C-band was in the 80s with those big ugly dishes, they call it, C-band, and it promoted the revolution in terms of video distribution. And then we had the Ka-band, broadband revolution. Now it's the LEOs, and these are just some of the impacts that it's already having right now. Now for manufacturers, there's a lot of innovation, and that's another, I think, offshoot of the pandemic. There's a famous story that the great scientist Newton, he actually lived through a pandemic, and he spent time in a farm, and there's a legend that he actually came up with his best theories during that time. And I also see that, all of these not necessarily were born out of the pandemic, but they certainly were honed, improved, and because of the time that people suddenly had, and also because of the disruption that has happened, and that you have to plan for the future. All of these new technologies. I think in the last decade, there's only one major innovation that really stands out in the satellite industry, and that is, I think, the launch costs had gone down a lot. And Elon Musk's SpaceX really is responsible for that. The reusable rocket, which never existed before. Each time, Elon used that analogy where the space industry is, if it were an airline, it's like flying people to one place and then throwing away the plane, and then have to build another plane just to fly them back, or etc. That's how it is. And now that's why the entry level costs are a lot easier now. So, but now there's a lot of these new. These are the ones you have to look out for. Electric satellites, which have these benefits. Modular satellites, software-defined satellites. You'll hear this a lot. Satellite is hardware. It used to be hardware determines what the satellite can do. But now a satellite, it's like a computer, You change the software and it can do a lot more. They can change the mission. They can change the coverage and capabilities of a satellite without actually replacing the hardware. There's also optical and laser communications, which facilitates inter-satellite links faster because they're laser, so they can, especially the LEOs, they need to communicate, very frequently and accurately. Satellite service stations. This is another very innovative thing. This means there are now they can refuel a satellite. There are dedicated rockets that docks with satellite. They can repair it, they can refuel it, which makes the satellite last longer, as opposed to, so things are really changing. For many years, when the satellite started around the 60s to the 90s, there wasn't very big innovations. But these last 5 years and then the coming years, we'll see a lot. One note on the pandemic, as we're nearing the end of the pandemic, most people will say, who are experts in pandemics, that the only certainty is there will be another pandemic. So we'll have to prepare for that, and I hope that, and I think, most satellite companies have learned their lessons from from the pandemic. So pandemics, it's a reality. It's you may want to debate on that, but it's always best to be prepared. So satellite companies always have a disaster recovery plan, and you should have a pandemic plan. You should know, so you won't be caught off guard again. When it happens again next time. In summary, these are transitionary times for the satellite industry. Tough times requires tough measures, and that's a cliche there, but I like that. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So there are many threats to the satellite industry, and I've outlined some of them. But I think the strengths and opportunities will outweigh the threats in the long run. It's gone a long way when it started, way back in the 50s when the first satellite was launched, and I think it will not only survive, it will thrive. So I end there.